Hi, Jeff and Jonathan. Good to see you again. Second video.
Hello.
I think I don't know if you're still having technical problems, Jonathan, or whether you're in with us.
I can hear you. I can't see any stream, so I don't know how my video is coming through because it's still looking weird. Yeah, it's still weird. Never mind. It
looks okay. What's being broadcast looks fine. Yeah. Okay. So this is a little bit the plan of where we might end up going with the presentation today, and if we don't finish it, then we've still got lots of material to look at. What we're going to do is we're going to start by I'm going to do a little bit of a talk over to a video that
can I interrupt?
Think is
Can I interrupt?
Yeah, go for it, Jeff. Yeah, go on.
I'm getting all sorts of delays and loops. So I'm hearing several Angus's, and I'm hearing a huge delay on my.
Okay. Have you got the tab of the video open on a page in a browser somewhere? Or how about now? Is that better?
Let me see.
Because I know I've seen other people sort of like have tabs open with the video.
There we go. Let me just exit out of that altogether. All right. Thank you. Okay. Sorry about that.
No problems. Jonathan, ready to go?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Okay. So we're off. So very brief overview of where we might end up going today. Going to be looking at Goethe's Urpflanze and why it's important in this context. Going to be looking at a curious passage in the fifth gospel of Steiner, which is particularly illuminating in relation to the riddles of philosophy. And we're then going to be trying to build on the question that we asked in the first video that we did, which is like, what does Steiner mean when philosophy begins to understand itself? Because I think there are some very interesting ways of answering that question. And let's move on. So this is basically more so like information. I guess you're familiar with this. What I'm about to say about Goethe, but again, I'd really like you to chip in on this. I'm gonna just turn the video voice down there.
So is the Goethe phase?
Exactly, we're in the Goethe phase. So I mean, what is it that simplifying? What is it that Goethe is actually saying? He's saying that if we want to really experience what's going on in a plant, we have to we create pictures in our minds based on visual observation, and that these pictures that they create emotions, feelings, that they awaken something in our inner life, and that isn't it isn't some random creation. This is a feeling reaction. Just like with sight, we are getting like a light reaction to what's going on outside. We can also enter into a feeling relationship with the world around us. And when we do that, what we begin to do is we begin to experience actually the life forces that are causing this plant to grow on screen. And it's interesting. I was teaching a group a group of young boys at school last week, and they were like 10, 11 years old. It's like a very small class. I don't normally do this. And I was showing them this video, which seems to have stopped for you guys. There we go. Showing them this video, and one of the boys, he was sort of, oh, this is beautiful. It's magical. And I think when we do try to enter into the magic of what's happening in a plant with our feeling
bird
lives,
trying to take.
That's right, yeah. When we try to enter into this thing with our feeling lives, something very, very special happens. Now, for many years on and off, I've been doing meditations. It's like basically a Steiner meditation, where what you do is you try to become a plant. We're surrounded by trees here, so I tend to do it with trees rather than like little plants like this. But what gradually starts awakening in your inner life, in your soul, is an intense sensation of what it means to grow. But you're following the process as it, like we saw in the video that's on the side here. It's like how from a seed, this seed, where does the force come? Where does the intelligence come from? Where does the desire come from? Just like, first of all, it's like start growing roots. And then, then this, after it's established a few roots, we see like how it pops up. It's like it starts growing. It's like, how does this whole growing process happen? And then finally, it's like, it disobeys all the laws of gravity by like chucking the earth aside as it pops off there, and continues to grow. But there are forces, there are internal laws to this plant that, so let's say the leaves are going to have a certain shape, and it'll never be the perfect, so like a perfect shape. There'll always be minor variations on the shape of the leaf, but you would never find an oak leaf on a rowan tree, for example. It can't do it can't do things like that. There are laws that live within this being, and they are coming to expression in a tree or in a plant. And for me, this is an essential part of what Goethean science is. It's trying to live yourself into the phenomena of nature. Yeah, so that was the first slide that I thought I would show. Did you guys want to like add anything? Perhaps I've missed something. Perhaps you'd like to add something to make it more clear, your own perspectives on what Goethean science is, the Goethean methodology is.
After you, Jeff.
I was just going to say, I think that's an excellent way to introduce a living approach to the subject matter that we're about to embark on. So I'm happy to continue following your presentation.
Good. And now my thing is not behaving. Why is that? So okay. There
can I just?
Yeah. Here we go. Yeah, go on, Jonathan.
I think the way you introduced that was you introduced it through the feelings. So we start with our imagination, a mental kind of thought process, but you emphasize feelings in this, and I think that's key, because where I am, some doing is let's say the sort of the feeling of feelings, the ultimate archetype of feeling as such as love of oneself to something else, is the feeling with which one is approaching, say, I think what will be at least starting to happen with Goethe was that then it goes even beyond just kind of thinking about and develops. That's kind of necessary parts of it to understand. It's an actual marriage with through marriage to this other being, and then it's action. So there is between the two of you, the conversation between you, there a real comes to birth, and then one is with the creator of the plant. One is a co-creator with that, not in the sense that one plant to come to be, not in what we're talking about. Hence, one is one with those of the plant, so much like a mother becomes one with the generating a baby inside themselves. Only this is happening in our soul rather than our, and so it's not just happening kind of inside us more or less, something we can see but not be fully conscious and partake in within the consciousness itself.
There's a deepening of the inner life, isn't it? A real deepening of the inner life rather than it's like a thought relationship to the world. It becomes something far deeper.
It's the virgin birth.
To another.
Sorry, Jeff, you said you slung in an interesting word there for virgin birth. Yeah, go on. No, make the connection for us.
It's immaculate conception, isn't it? It's the soul receiving the seed and giving birth to giving birth to something living inside it. Yeah, that's where we are in this book at this moment. I think this is why we're all sitting here and why we're so goddamn moved by it.
Yeah. So we've when we looked at chapter 2, we had this question. So, like, philosophy understanding itself. How this was the last question on our list, and I really want to like dig deeper into this because of just in the last weeks, like several things have like come to light that I think it's nice to share with other people. So what's going on? Well, first of all, obviously I was preparing for the group that we're all part of with Matt on footnotes to Plato on YouTube, and then for some reason that I can't explain rationally, I decided to, like, 15 years after first reading, I started listening to the Fifth Gospel again. Of Steiner, an amazing work in itself. But there, right in the middle, in the sixth conference, 23rd of October 1913, I believe it was, he mentions just in passing that that he wrote the second part of the Riddles of Philosophy before he wrote the first part. And he then goes on to describe how this was actually a momentous occasion for him. And there are lots of other things going on here, because also at this same time, Steiner talks for the very first time, I'm talking within a couple of months span here, about the being called Anthroposophia, which we'll come to later. What does he actually mean there? But he admits in this lecture, he states openly, I wasn't aware of the importance of like the development of thinking and this whole process until I started re-looking at this period that we've covered in the first chapters, from the Greeks through to I'm just going to go back a slide here, because we started with the Christian era, looked at the Gnostics, mentioned Dionysius, went to the Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas, mysticism, realists versus nominalists. We're talking about these important streams in the growth of thinking. And then he moves us into the modern age, talking about Giordano Bruno and his monads, Francis Bacon with inductive reasoning, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, John Locke, George Berkeley. All of these he characterizes in a wonderful way. So like an essence or something new, or a type of refinement that's happening in the thinking process. And then we move through to the we're still pre-idealists here, but he talks about Lessing, education of man, Herder, Shaftesbury, who talks to us about like the inner life, really first time. It's like in a philosophical framework, Shaftesbury talks about this interior life, this inner life that's going on, this experience of oneself, not in the ego sense, but that we are strange creatures in that we have these emotional relationships. We've known this, humanity has known this, but we didn't talk about it consciously. In the way that Shaftesbury begins to do, and that's how he makes his appearance in the first 9 chapters. And then we come to Kant, so important, Goethe, Hume, Schiller, Schelling, Schleiermacher, Herbert Schopenhauer, and all of these people. And the whole time, Steiner is building this picture of different directions that thinking is growing in its understanding of itself, but and often I'm not sure how well, I can't remember how well he characterizes how these different streams of thinking are talking to each other. Some people like Goethe and Hegel, for example, he's very explicit. He talks about Kant's interaction, or more Goethe's interaction or lack of interaction with Kant. So he does talk about how there's all these different streams, and occasionally how these streams are fructifying each other. But they're still on the surface of on an initial reading. These are all individual streams going on. And if you're an average thinker like I am, it's like you're trying to think, okay, so which one's the truth? Which one's the truth? And yeah, so that he's walked us through that, and then he brings us finally in chapter 9, before we start on part 2, to people like Feuerbach, Lichtenberg, and Stirner, who are people who have, they've become their own absolute authorities. It's like I am. There's no outer truth. I am just an individual, and I am my own. I am my own authority, as he has Stirner say. So he's walked us through this whole process, and then we discover that he's actually he's giving us the first part of the book after he's actually written the second part of the book. And this picture that I got up on my screen here, this is actually the original version of the second part of part 2, which was a single volume, Band 1, which he calls, it's like the pre-studies to the Riddles of Philosophy, written in 1900. And there's even an interesting thing going on here. So Ernst Haeckel, actually as a big important biologist, naturalist in this period, he's actually dedicated, he's actually herzliche Hochschätzung. So he's said, this is basically Haeckel has come along and said, this is an amazing book, because what Steiner does in the second part of the book is he outlines the growth of, it's like the modern mind, the modern mindset, the scientific, sorry, I should say, it'd be a better way of describing it, a scientific appreciation of the world. And so one of a big name, Ernst Haeckel, comes along and says, Mr. Steiner, you've done a good job there.
I didn't know Steiner got Haeckel's blurb on his books.
Yeah. So, so this is, I'm finding this out, and then it's like trying to marry it with what's going on in the books, like this process that I've been involved in, or not we've always all been involved in, it's like in our own individual ways. And when you find out that this second part was written first, and Steiner's like saying this, you realize that he's become intrigued about like, how do we actually get here? He's written this glowing report about like scientific thinking, and what does he do? He uses the Goethean method. He says he like sees the fruit or the flower of the modern scientific mind, and he says, well, this didn't grow out of nowhere. It would be like walking out in the field and so like seeing loads of flower heads on the field that were just floating in the air without any leaves around them, without any stem, and without any roots. It doesn't happen. Things like this, if you really subscribe to a Goethean approach to understanding the world, is everything is in a process of growth, and that this also applies to the philosophical thinking.
So,
and that's why he ends up writing the first part. Yeah. Go on, Jonathan.
So as Haeckel was an evolutionary biologist amongst, Steiner was was an ecologist in the sense in evolutionary biology, tracking how the development occurred. And Steiner was looking back how this development of
so he's because part two of the book is 50-60 years of philosophy, or not, so that's like the philosophy of science, the modern mindset.
Well, thinking,
I have to be careful. I have to be careful here because I haven't read the second part. That's what we're as a group like starting to do. But the interesting point for me is, because we're all somewhat familiar with the modern materialist mindset, we can have, although I'm sure lots of nuances will come out when we read the book, we still have we have a living experience of what it is. So he's done this analysis, and then he's gone back and tried to find out, okay, where does this come from?
Angus, this is such a great time to bring this at the turn of the book, because you get the feeling that he had this experience, like in one respect, that he was sort of like that Talking Head song, "How did I get here? This is not my
great song.
It's not my big house. This is not my big, what the hell?" But at the same time, this is right. Yes. Who am I? But who are we? This seems to be the question he's asking. Who are we? And he's in the midstream of presenting Anthroposophia to the world by this point, by the time he writes the first part of the book, which is confusing a little bit when you start talking about it in these terms. He writes the first part of the book second, in order to put something. I think that I think that he was doing was it had occurred to him that there was a need for humanity to have a morphological understanding of how the hell we got to this point. And this is an opportunity at this time in history to take a look at that which was rushing in and tending to dominate the human mindset. So I'm left with a question, because of that, what is the relationship of the Stirnerian individual and the collective, the sort of Marxian collective intelligence, or in the case of Marx, the collective stupidity? What is the relationship? And so it's like he's trying to give a connectivity to the evolution of human species, to the individuation as species. So this is something I wanted to I think we're going to be addressing as relates to what Matt has offered when he said, Darwin was really, his origin of species is about the origin of, is about speciation. It's not the origin of existence. But there's no difference. You can't get around that. If an individual, as Steiner says in Philosophy of Freedom, is a species in and of themselves, are in and of themselves species, then what the hell is a species? And what is the origin of it? What's the origin of being human? And how is that to the origins of life? And then, so these are the questions we have. And this is the time that they were being asked. There was some conversation about it, but Steiner's the only one that had a developed answer to it, and suggested that it might not be a good idea to go down a one-sided path and lay in the beginnings of chapter 2, he brings in Malthus and describes the way in which Darwin overlaid Malthusian social narrative on in a way to explain how human beings were a undifferentiated part of nature, something like that. And that was a dangerous moment, and I think Steiner was seeing that happen and was not particularly thrilled with that.
Yeah. Interesting.
So,
Go on, Jonathan.
just to say Malthus, on the screen you have the Riddles of Philosophy, the first part on the right, a gospel, but it's a fifth gospel. It's a new, old religion, old traditions. So it's because Malthus was obviously materialistic. I don't know if he would have been anti that kind of thing, but not that. And the chapter before, with the some of them bring back some kind of religion to get away just from to bring back something, a more felt experience of, they kind of try to bring back traditional religion. But this is that fifth gospel suggests to me something very different.
I think that one of the that question I think I'm going to try and answer in the next couple of slides, or give a potential answer to what is going on. So I actually think the timing is really interesting here. This 1913, which is when the Anthroposophical Society comes into being, Steiner is writing the first part of his Riddles of Philosophy and says that he has a new perspective on the importance of where we are in world thinking, of the necessity of the scientific mode of thinking. I'll try to unpack that a little bit, what I mean. I think what he's saying is that if we are going to be truly free, this is obviously in the spirit of the Philosophy of Freedom. If we are going to be truly free, we have to get rid of all of our old ways of thinking. We cannot bring anything through on authority. And this is where people like Stirner, Feuerbach and Lichtenberg are like they're wonderful representatives of this necessity, of this historical necessity to rub out the past, to scrub it, because if we bring anything based on a... Go on, say I don't follow, because I haven't actually read it so far. So go on, Jonathan, say what you're thinking.
Well, just a man that is very radically saying all that religion and all that stuff. This is what it is. It's just bing bang bonk. So it becomes a new author. I mean, it was very original, different.
So we've got this going on in the book, and but at the same time, when the period that Steiner's writing this in, he begins to talk about this being called Anthroposophia for the first time. He basically, if I've understood it correctly, he only ever mentions this being twice, once in 1913 and once in 1923 in lectures. And what is this? What is this Anthroposophia? One of the things I'm beginning to wonder is whether this is actually the being, and I'll unpack that, the reason why I phrase it like that in a second. This being was actually what inspired Steiner with the fifth gospel. It's certainly, he begins to talk about a spirit that is a real being, in the sense that angels, archangels, Michael in anthroposophical terms, are real beings. They are beings that we assume to be not just a figment of our imagination, but real beings that impact what is happening at our thought life, our feeling life, and our will life, just to mention a few examples. So this being Anthroposophia gets mentioned. He writes the fifth gospel, but also this is during the time when he's really understood because of his studies with the riddles of philosophy, he's understood the necessity of dismissing anything based on past authority. So we're making this complete break with the past, or it's for the development of freedom. This is essential, and then becomes the question: what? I'm going to flash up this a quote that we actually talked about in our group on Thursday, and I think if we view if we take on board what I've just said, then the phrase that's on the screen here becomes a lot more understandable, a lot more real, that the anthroposophical anthroposophy has a role in the further development of a way of appreciating the world, a way of understanding the world. The ancient Greeks had Sophia, Dante had Philosophia, and these beings disappeared. These were real beings to these to the people, and then to Dante. They were spiritual beings. And what Steiner's saying is that Anthroposophia is the new. I want to say it's going to sound very vulgar when I say it, but it's like Philosophia 2.0. It's the version that the individual needs. It's to move forward as a free individual being. But this is something that every individual has to make a conscious choice of trying to build a relationship with this being, and that is the role of anthroposophy. So the picture Steiner is creating is so like he is so like the at that time so like the ultimate representative of a spiritual being called Anthroposophia. And what is her role? It's like now and into the future. It's to help human beings, individuals who choose to it's like through their inner lives to reconnect with the wisdom of the cosmos, to an understanding of spiritual worlds. Any
yes.
thoughts, reflections?
Yeah. It's that, and it's also because it's not just a way to appreciate and understand, but it's actually a way to be the world. The way I have it is that, in a sense, you could say Anthroposophia is Rudolf Steiner's soul in that moment. His real him, which is an Anthroposophia, and so it's actually 2.0 going beyond just understanding, but actually again fully integrated part of the world, but as you crucially pointed out, as a free. So, and it's a choice, but it's more than a choice because it's staying with and attending to and a being with.
Did you want to say? I've got more slides to go, but these are actually more. These are more like interactive and as a way of trying to find examples of what it is we're trying to achieve with our thinking. But before we move on to these pictures that I'm going to play with, I thought I'd just see if there's anybody that wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Anthroposophia picture also goes back to kind of what I was trying to say earlier, which is the Immaculate Conception, the divine feminine, essentially. And the divine feminine is no longer an abstraction at this time. And this connects, of course, with the Christ mystery and the Immaculate Conception of Christ and the mystery there, which is often set aside as foolish. But when you look at it from a cosmological perspective or a cosmogonic perspective, as my friend Sophia might say, oddly enough, that's her name for real. Then you have a different paradigm of the way in which you might be looking at the world, in which the cosmological and the individual are brought together. And that also might be a reason why we're seeing so many in our time questions about gender and identity as the natural evolutionary process for human beings, meaning the ontological realm of what it is to be a human being, is possible only in a certain sense when the human being is taken as differentiated from the rest of nature, not exceptional above it, but discernive from it. Then the relationship between the individual and the cosmogonic is the moment that we're living in as a possibility for uniting individual intelligence with collective intelligence. And that's done when the divine feminine resides in this individual soul of every single person. And in a sense, that's not a choice, right? That is part of the evolutionary stream that was restarted in a certain sense, or at the mystery of Golgotha, at the resurrection, and then the 3 days particularly the 3 days in the sort of belly of the beast, if you will, in the underworld, or the what the Greeks called, maybe it's the chthonic, if that's a correct description. He lived into the mothers, and him and right, and then was resurrected out of that, and that's the direction that we have to go in. We have to actually go into the material tomb in a certain sense and come out the other side, and
discover ourselves in that tomb.
yes, as a speciation process, as Matt might put it. So those are the just preliminary thoughts I have associated with your presentation so far.
And I think it could be rejected. One doesn't have to also a choice which is the acceptance or the going to be renewed, because it's not just going to happen automatically. One wouldn't be a species, an example of a species. The whole thing about people recreating themselves, recreating their gender, recreating their physical appearance, it's this us coming back to the creative powers, the universal intelligence or something like that just now. Creative, what creates everything. So as we to our kind of holistic, we are very creative individuals. This is the important point where for bringing Goethe, he wasn't just a philosopher or a scientific intellectual approach to applying his thinking faculties to an artistic approach. And the artistic approach is unique in the sense that in the artistic approach you really attend to the feelings, because it's that thing again where you fall in love with the subject, give yourself over to the subject, and it's only in that way that you can then see it. But to create it and what the manner in which nature was able to create, and paint a portrait of someone, which isn't, it's not just that person, but it kind of indicates more of that person than was ever their natural look. But and yet it's like a novel, more about a person than just if you sort of knew that. So that attending stuff over in love and attention is, you can sort of compare purely natural scientific mode, which is a bit that's more kind of like finding and a comparing facility. Sort of, you have the intellect to separate everything out, to distinguish it. Really, you have our reasoning capacity to bring those things back together in general categories. And that's probably all I should say now. It's very interesting you brought a lily here, which is it brings to mind me kind of like Buddhist sense. It'd be quite interesting to be able to a rose superimposed together, because last thing in this book, Riddles is focused on Western development, and the East comes in a little bit, like in Schopenhauer and perhaps Lessing and so forth, but only kind of there might be, I'm sure many people would sort of but what about the whole rest of the world? What about all the thought of the whole rest of the world? I think yes, it would be wonderful to have say like a Steiner in say China, and able to define in the sort of mode of thought and consciousness, to trace these subtle changes, the growth and development of it. But on the other hand, I think, by a sort of happy accident, happen to have been born at this point where perhaps it's only here these points that he's looked at, that thinking by thinkers so sort of clearly and delineated, so much detail, that one can really kind of with it in like India or somewhere else. It would the plant there would have a different still be a plant developing in the same manner, but a different character, and perhaps it's clearer in soil at this moment in time, at least.
Okay, I'm just going to just to lead us into the second bit, because as I said, I'm going to try to turn it into something a little bit more practical. So it's a little bit like questions and answer section. But I'm going to just read this quote, which is actually right at the end of the Riddles of Philosophy, and I think this is why I feel justified, because I hadn't read this before, or at least not with the level of consciousness I have now. That he says in the Riddles of Philosophy, Anthroposophia is in herself an invisible human being who goes amongst visible human beings, towards whom we have the greatest conceivable responsibility, who must indeed be regarded as an invisible human being, as someone with a real existence, who should be consulted in all life's individual actions, to whom we are responsible. In everything that happens is to be viewed in consultation with a human being, Anthroposophia, as a living being. So that is what is necessary, true seriousness in our following of that invisible human being to whom I have just spoken. And so summing up where I am now with this book is, Steiner's basically saying that he has been awakened to or become ultra clear. Perhaps he was awake before, but awakened ultra clear to the existence of this being as a product of writing this book. Clearly, he was an exceptional initiate before 1913, but it was something. Was this really it's like a critical point? It's like an inflection point for Steiner, because we've got the Anthroposophical Society being formed. We got the fifth gospel, which he also talks about how significant this is, and this is something new to him. And I do think it's very interesting that it's happening at the same time as he's writing the first part of the Riddles of Philosophy, where he was applying the Goethean symptomological study approach to history. Everything's a being. It's like in becoming or dying type of thing.
I think it might be a good point to ask a question or a series of questions that maybe we can bookmark, but not necessarily answer. And that is, what was Steiner? So what is initiation? So if you were talking to an audience of people who didn't understand the term, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And what are the stages of initiation? And then what stage of initiation was he going through at this point? Because I don't hear that asked, and maybe it is asked, maybe other people who've been biographies of Steiner, but it really occurs to me in a living way right now to ask those questions. What was occurring in his soul that he was able to perceive this being? And how does it relate to the way in which he then wrote the first part of this book, and why he wrote the first part of this book in relationship or in honor or in intimacy or guided by or whatever you might say? That sounds like inspiration to me with a capital I, but I'm not clear on that, and I have that question. What stages of consciousness is he going through?
I'm going to give an initial answer to your second question there, Jeff. When I reread the sixth chapter of the fifth gospel, my impression, I'm not saying this is how it was, but my impression was this was the fruit of him doing this study of transversing this whole period of time. That's the way I understood it, but I need to go and check because you've asked the question so poignantly. I'm gonna go back and check that I didn't miss some important detail. But that is like how I remember reading the experience. He's saying, thanks to me doing this process, Anthroposophia turned up on my doorstep and said, "Woohoo! Here we go." Which.
Yeah, that's a lovely picture. I want little because from Riddles, very careful that he never spoke publicly about anything that he had for years and years and years. So there will be exceptions to that, but I think it needs to be seen as this. It needs to be made quite clear from the outset that this is there's no form of him just going, wow, tell me everything that I need to know Anthroposophia. So I mean that needs to be made very clear. It might be that this could be the fruit of many years, the point where it all became clear, a crystal clear sort of but I don't believe goes against everything that he is and that he hoped to for in the world, that it would just be a mission from on high, which then he was the messenger of. It is Anthroposophia, a living being. It can also, in more mundane terms, a spiritual science.
Lots of questions there.
Yeah, I don't think it's a mutually exclusive program here. I think that he is having, the world is revealing itself before him in an unfurling way as his soul unfurls, and as the work he did, just like any of us mortal human beings, when we write or when we do something creative, we're discovering new aspects of the subject matter ourselves and the process that informs how to do that. And that triangulation is mutually permeating, isomorphic process. Whereas for material science, it's the subject, the object, and the objectivity as methodology, and you have to go in that direction only. And there's no mutually interpenetrating reality. And I think he's revealing a process in what he does constantly. He's revealing it. He's not just talking about a process. Here's how you do it. Here's what I'm doing, and you can see it. You can see my art unfolding before you in a certain way as an artist of concepts.
So Goethe found the Urpflanze because he studied it in detail. Steiner rediscovered Anthroposophia because he did his homework, he did his studies. That's what you're saying, isn't it, Jeff?
Yes, and I'm saying he is doing it here. It's a living.
Exactly.
This is why when you read Steiner, they're living documents. Like you're just like blown away by the layers. And I'm sure, his reincarnated self might read that stuff and go, hey, that's pretty good stuff. Right?
Okay, let's move on to the next bit, which is more, probably a bit more like quick fire. Okay, so what do you see on the screen, guys?
No. Negative.
Snow?
Yeah.
Do you see something else?
A dog.
Ah, good. We've got a dog. Okay, so with this series of images that I'm going to give you, what I'm trying to do is to try to separate our thinking, how it is a separate soul faculty. So quite rightly, you see a dog there. Or is it a dog? It's actually just black and white. But what's happened is that we've seen lots of dogs before. And so like we can see a certain form. And what we do is we superimpose a dog onto that. And once we've got that dog there, we've solved the problem, haven't we? We sort of like, no, that's clear. And so like I can look away and I look back and yeah, the dog's still there. And this is how, when we look out to the world, what we're doing is we're doing this same process of recognizing something that already lives in us. If somebody who had never seen a dog before, they wouldn't see that dog that you and I can see. Yeah. Next picture. Okay. So what's going on here? Somebody describe to me what they're seeing.
Goop. Angled. The upper edge going to the top left, and going down, sort of pointing towards the bottom right.
Have I got a pointer or something? I think I've got a laser pointer. Yeah, I got a pointer. There we go. So why did I pick this picture? Is because this is if we think about objective science, so like we look at the world and it tells us. We create concepts based on an objective reading of the situation. I feel like I'm expressing that very clumsily. By studying the world, we can overcome subjectivity. It might be one way of describing it. So we're all looking at exactly the same picture here, yet some of us will see this as the front edge. Yeah. And other people will see that as the front edge. And in actual fact, at will, depending on what we want to see at the front edge, we can flip. Now I see this at the front. Oh, I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to see this at the front now. And so the
moment
idea
of the act of will, that moment.
Exactly. Exactly. So we can't talk about objectivity. It's a simple example here, but we can't talk about objectivity because what we realize is we are interacting with the image. Often we're not conscious, but once we are conscious that it's me interacting, then I can begin to exert my will on that picture. But also what's important is that I separate out from, it's not the outside world. There is a truth in the outside world, and I just have to capture it. It becomes a better description is the truth lives in me, and I see it reflected out in the world. there.
Interesting,
Okay.
because this example, and I can make it one or the other. So in a sense, you could say it's magic, square, its actual being, but it doesn't have any bearing beyond the sense. Do you know what I mean? I couldn't pick up the square one way or pick it differently. But it'd be very interesting to
hopefully by the end of the series of pictures we'll be getting a clearer relationship that's going on here. Okay, so let's look at the next one. This is called okay, what do you see here?
It's quite small on my screen.
Okay.
It's funny that
this is the key area that you want to be looking at.
There seems to be a lady in the back to that with a white smock on.
Those, are you talking about those two ladies there?
No, behind her to the right, but it might just
that one
be
there. What,
no,
Jeff? Have you got it on a larger screen that you can see?
Yeah, it's apparently there's an image of a very large head of an old woman, presumably old woman, or not, but
this one,
person.
This here, yeah.
Or you could shift your perception slightly, and you could see two women sort of shoulder to shoulder, looking outward, with the other characters surrounding them to some extent.
Yeah. So again, this is another. Sorry, go on. I interrupted you.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah. So basically, this is like the cube, but a nicer piece of artwork. It's sort of like depends on the perspective that we want to gather, that we want to take to look at the image. We can either see the two ladies here and here, dressed up. I don't know if you'd say they're dressed like nuns, possibly, or you can see the bust. This particular painting is called the Bust of Voltaire. Okay, next one. This artist. Do you know who this artist is, Jonathan?
Cézanne.
It is Cézanne. Now, what was Cézanne trying to do? Cézanne was a post-impressionist, and here we have to enter into the picture with a different relationship, and this is really what Cézanne, I think, is trying to do. He's trying to he doesn't want to use clear outlines to determine what you think it is. He's using like these broad brushstrokes that create an impression of what is going on. And involuntarily, it's like if we're normal, if we're average human beings, what we're trying to do is trying to find some reference point where we can say, oh, this is what it is. Okay, I recognize it. So this picture, I'm going to kill this picture now, or kill the intent of this picture by giving it a label. Okay, on the banks of a river. Okay, so as soon as I say that, if you didn't see it clearly, you can begin to see it, can't you? That's certainly where you've got buildings, you've got a river here. Not exactly sure what you've got going on here. But here it becomes more obvious, especially if you can't find like a solution to this problem, that here I've got sensory information, but I'm lacking the concepts to make sense of it. I can't sort of like readily identify. So my inner life, so all of the different concepts and like imaginations that live in my inner world, they somehow can't sort of like put their finger on it. They can't say that's what it is. And this is actually what Cézanne and the post-impressionists, I believe. Jonathan, I hope you're going to add another layer of detail to this with your artist background. But it's exactly this, that Cézanne is trying to do. He's trying to stop us from labeling, ticking off and moving to the next thing, but rather just to experience colors. And my daughter, she's into art, and I was showing her a different picture of Cézanne yesterday, and she was doing this with frames, which is another way of, so like if we look at this part of the picture, or this part of the picture, or this part of the picture, because if you do that, you start to live more intensely in the sensation or observation, as Steiner calls it in the Philosophy of Freedom. So this process of observation, but this process of observation contains nothing if it isn't accompanied by thinking. It's a visual experience. It's an experience of colors. But if I showed this picture to my dog, I don't think my dog would see a river there. I don't think it would see the sky. I don't think it would see anything. So we can, if we want to begin to separate out our what is it's like an essential part of our inner life. It's like this thinking, how we use thinking constantly to interpret the world outside. And we can do that by imagining being an animal or something like that. They don't see all the world of concepts that we see. They see raw images, and they'll see food and they'll go yum, yum, yum. But that's about where it stops, isn't it? Oh, simplifying the life of a dog there. But
yeah,
the
I probably tried to
process,
lick
it. That's right, yeah. Yeah, I wonder if that tastes good.
Yeah.
But the important process is that what we're trying to do here is to separate out what's coming from the outside, the observation, and what's coming from something that's created inside. And if anthroposophy is something, it's about creating new concepts, new mental images that allow us to see the world through a different appreciation of what the world actually is. We're saying, yeah, okay, we accept that all of those labels of science, of materialistic science, exist, but we can look at the same phenomena because we've developed different concepts and see something completely different from what the rest of the world sees. Last one of Cézanne, and then I get then you've got, then there's a test, okay? So this is another piece of Cézanne. One of the things that Cézanne's particularly enamored by trees, it turns out. A lot of his paintings contain trees, and in actual fact, I might have spoiled it a little bit, because if I'd have asked you what do you actually see on the screen, you might have said trees, you might not have, but this is actually, it's like Trees in a Landscape by Cézanne. But what is interesting that Cézanne himself, I'm just going to pick up on my notes here. People, how can I express this? One of the things that frustrated Cézanne, when people said that his art was abstract, and this was very frustrating to Cézanne, because actually he said he was always painting from nature. He was attempting to show what the sensations were providing. And if my own way of understanding what he means by that is that too many people are blinded by concepts so that they actually can't see. It's like raw sensation. We are continually looking to find the answer. This is that. And then so like saying, I don't need to investigate it any further. It's an anti-Goethean science way of going about life. I've got the answer. I don't need to look any deeper, rather than understanding that, no, actually, it's my own mental life, my own inner life that I see reflected in the outside world. And if I have this attitude of saying, I found the answer, I don't need to look anymore, then I've then I am killing a soul faculty in my own inner being that allows me to go deeper into these things and see layers of meaning, and actually rediscover other realities that are in the same picture. So I think it's interesting how I'm really trying to get across this idea of how we separate out this observation, pure sense phenomena, from the inner aspect that we add through this inner life that we have. And the more we can be conscious of how we are adding this to the outside world, or to a picture of Cézanne, or to a picture of anything, the more we could become conscious of this inner life. And this is in this inner life that, if we're going to link back to Anthroposophia, if this inner life becomes lively enough, this is where these new concepts can begin to, it's like be seen by the soul itself, without needing any reference to external sensational phenomena. But then we actually find them actually out there in the real world as well. Okay, final question from me. What do you see, guys?
Strange giraffe head. Oh no, it is.
You were a lot quicker than the average person there, Jonathan. If I ask other people, usually people can't see anything there, but I should have asked you to keep it to yourself. I should have, when you're certain that you know what it is, just like put your hand up. Because what happens, if I give a description for what normally happens when you show this type of thing, is that people look at it and they cannot see anything. They just see, so like a large, it's like lots of different splodges. It might also be the way I presented it today. But as soon as you, if you tell them that, and they'll make up all type of things, images that it could be, but you can hear from the uncertainty in their voices, they're a little bit unsure. But then when you say the word giraffe, and that's the eye, or that's its like antler, or that's the top of its head there, then they see it, and then the object is like fixed in their mind, and they feel that they've got it. So usually I actually need to feed them with the concept there so they can even see something. And again, this is an example of, yet another example of how this doesn't need to surprise us. This isn't some type of optical illusion. This is, we've got two fundamentally different processes going on here. We've got observation, and then we've got our inner lives interacting with that and mapping what is going on in their own inner lives onto what they're seeing.
May I just riff on what you just said specifically?
Yeah.
With this one, I really had to do something actually with my physical eyes, with my the physiological process, in order to allow the the image to emerge in a certain way, and by contrast to that, I also, in a way, took a different route at first and looked at all of the individual images within, which are sort of interesting. Bone, some are bone-like, some are plant-like, that sort of thing. So there's a sort of morphological experience between flipping between the two in a certain way, but it does take will and it does take the sense perception. But with Cezanne, it's a different process, because what I'm asked to do isn't with my eyes, it's with a different aspect of my soul. So my perception is one part of my soul, feeling is another part of my soul, willing is another part of my soul. I have to, in a way, I don't have to do anything. I can just stare blankly at all of it. But what Cezanne is trying to do, I think, is present something alluring, something that will draw you in, particularly that with that second one. You wanted to walk right up the steps into that, whatever that was at the top of the steps. You wanted to be in, you wanted to enter in. And that's the thing that I think Cezanne is doing, which is touching upon, and we're utilizing different parts of our soul experience with a will, and then our thinking observation start to become united. Thinking and observation become united. So because you're inside it.
Okay, final slide. So when I've been talking about like separating out observation from these inner life processes, when we're capable, or as we become more capable of recognizing this individual faculty, inner life faculty, how we constantly use it to interpret the world, how this is actually separate from the world. We just map it onto the world. But if we are, the more we practice to extract that part, to separate this, like that what is usually fused into a whole, then this inner life becomes strengthened. And then something like the following begins to happen, or can begin to happen. Sophia will become objective again, but she will take with her what humanity is and objectively present herself in this form. Thus, she will present herself not only as a Sophia, but as Anthroposophia, as the Sophia who, after passing through the human soul, through the very being of the human being, henceforth bears that being within her. And in this form, she will confront enlightened human beings as the objective being Sophia, who once stood before the Greeks.
Beautiful. That's the mystery, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
And it's so related to the first part of Riddles of Philosophy, which was written second.
Yeah.
It's so related to the first part of the first part, which is the Greeks saw something through the mothers, and the mothers were, it's when the human beings threefold process was united itself, it wasn't separated out. Now we're living in a time where that has been individuated, where the spirit and the soul and theology are all separate, though potentially permeable to each other, in a sense. And the soul and the physical body can be vessels for the spirit, but doesn't have to be that way. That's our choice.
That's our choice. But before we can make that choice, we have to be aware it's available as a choice. And living in the society is like that. The societal influences that are so dominant today. This is one of the huge challenges that we face, is that so many people don't even realize this perspective on what life exists. the schooling system, university system, they all emphasize this: the world is out there, the truth is out there aspect, and which quite clearly is not the truth.
Right. This is why we're doing what we're doing, right? This is why Rudolf Steiner dedicated his life, and then later in his life he linked his karma with the Anthroposophical Society, if you will. And that's always a hard thing to say for me, the Anthroposophical Society, because Anthroposophia is a being, not a social construct. And so therein lies part of the mystery as well. How do we move beyond social constructs as that which informs the way in which we govern ourselves, develop ourselves, create institutions that can reflect our humanity?
Yeah,
these are all questions of our time, and they at this time in the Riddles of Philosophy, they went largely ignored those questions in a rush toward glomming on to that one-sided perceptual intellect, the intellect that is tied to the so-called sense perceptible world.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to just end the stream now.